Before we begin this deep and dark journey into the heart of Japan's Shadow Empire, I must issue a critical disclaimer. The story you are about to hear is not a work of fiction. It is a meticulously researched narrative, pieced together from countless sources: court documents, police records, investigative journalism, and first-hand testimonies from within the abyss. Our sole purpose is to present you with the most accurate, unvarnished truth about a man who exists in the blurred space between myth and terrifying reality. The details are graphic, the crimes are real, and the consequences were felt by real people. This is not a glorification. It is an examination of power in its most corrupt and violent form. So, if you are ready to peer into a world where tradition masks brutality and loyalty is sealed in blood, then listen closely. This is the story of Kenichi Shinoda, the sixth and current Kumicho of the Yamaguchi-gumi, the largest and most merciless crime syndicate on Earth. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, as we dedicate ourselves to bringing you the most compelling true stories from the darkest corners of our world. Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell, because what you're about to hear will change your perception of organized crime forever. The tale of Kenichi Shinoda cannot be understood without first descending into the ancient, ritualistic pit from which he crawled. The Yakuza, with origins stretching back to the 17th century, is not merely a criminal organization. It is a perverse mirror of Japanese society itself, built on codes of honor, absolute loyalty, and a stark hierarchy that mimics feudal Japan. To become Yakuza is to be reborn into an underground nation with its own laws, its own economy, and its own brutal sense of justice. It is into this world that a young Shinoda was inducted, a world where man's worth was measured by the severity of his crimes and the depth of his tattoos. Born in 1942, in the wake of a war-torn Japan, Shinoda's early life unfolded against a backdrop of national humiliation and desperate poverty. The post-war black markets, teeming with opportunists and survivors, became the fertile training ground for the Yakuza's explosive growth. It was here, in the smoky backrooms and chaotic streets, that the foundations of his empire were laid, not by privilege, but by a willingness to commit acts of violence that others would balk at. His initiation was the ultimate test of commitment, the yubitsume, or ritual finger-cutting. By severing a portion of his own little finger and presenting it to his oyaban, or foster father, Shinoda did more than just offer a token of apology or loyalty. He physically severed a part of his connection to the conventional world, symbolically reducing his ability to grip a sword, and thus binding himself forever to the brotherhood that would now wield him as a weapon. This act of self-mutilation was his first, profound step into a life where the body was a ledger of debt and atonement. But Shinoda was not just another foot soldier. He possessed a chilling calmness and a strategic mind that operated with a patience uncommon in the hot-headed world of street gangs. He rose through the ranks of the Yamaguchi-gumi, the colossus of syndicates, not merely as an enforcer, but as a cunning operator. His early criminal portfolio was a textbook of underworld enterprise, extortion, gambling rackets, and drug trafficking. He learned the delicate art of sakaya, corporate extortion, where Yakuza would buy shares in companies to disrupt shareholder meetings and extract hush money, a scheme that blurred the lines between the underworld and the gleaming towers of Japan Incorporated. Yet, his true education came from the man who would become his mentor and the architect of the modern Yakuza's power, Kazuo Tauka, the legendary godfather of the Yamaguchi-gumi. Under Tauka's watchful eye, Shinoda witnessed the transformation of the syndicate from a loose confederation of street thugs into a vertically integrated, multinational corporation of crime. Tauka understood the power of structure, diplomacy between clans, and the crucial importance of maintaining a perverse symbiosis with the political and law enforcement establishments. Shinoda absorbed these lessons in real time, often from the front lines of the gang wars that cemented the Yamaguchi-gumi's dominance. He fought in the brutal conflicts against rival clans, conflicts that turned city streets into battlefields and were settled with swords, pistols, and sheer terror. Each victory, each territory consolidated, was a line in Shinoda's rising resume. He was building a reputation not just as a feared warrior, but as a reliable, intelligent captain within Tauka's expanding empire. His rise was steady, deliberate, and stained with blood. By the time Japan's bubble economy of the 1980s began to inflate, Shinoda was perfectly positioned. The era of easy money and rampant speculation was a gold rush for the Yakuza, who muscled their way into real estate, stock market manipulation, and loan sharking on an industrial scale. Shinoda, now a senior member, helped navigate this flood of illicit capital, laundering it through shell companies and lavish investments, further entwining the Syndicate's fortune with the very heart of the Japanese economic miracle. This period was his graduate study in high finance crime, setting the stage for the unprecedented level of influence he would one day command. The low-profile young Kenichi Shinoda's ascent to the absolute pinnacle of the Yakuza was not a coronation but a violent seizure of power forged in the chaos of betrayal and internal war. 4 decades, he had been the loyal sword of the Yamaguchi-gumi, but the death of his mentor, Kazuo Tauka, in 1981, created a power vacuum that would simmer for years before erupting into open conflict. The man who initially assumed control, Masahisa Takenaka, lacked Tauka's unifying force, and factions within the colossal syndicate began to fracture. Shinoda, by now a top lieutenant with his own powerful faction and a network of unwavering loyalists, watched as the edifice Tauka built started to crack. The inevitable explosion came in 1984, with the outbreak of the Yama-Ichi War, a bloody and protracted internal civil war that would become the most devastating conflict in Yakuza history. It was a war not against an external rival, but a cancerous fight between the Yamaguchi-gumi's own splinter groups, a brutal contest for the soul and the treasury of the organization. Shinoda was not a mere participant in this war. He was one of its principal architects and most lethal commanders. The streets of Kobe and Osaka became hunting grounds, with shootings and assassinations occurring in broad daylight, shattering Japan's carefully cultivated image of public safety. Shinoda's faction, known for its discipline and ferocity, engaged in a series of tactical strikes and retaliations that were as strategic as they were savage. This period revealed the core of Shinoda's leadership, a cold, calculating pragmatism that viewed violence as a precise tool rather than an emotional outburst. He understood that in a war of attrition, resources and alliances were as important as firepower. His strategic genius, however, could not shield him from the consequences of the very violence he orchestrated. In 1985, at the height of the war, Kenichi Shinoda was arrested for the murder of a rival gang member, a Yamaguchi-gumi affiliate who had sided with an opposing faction. The details of the killing were quintessentially Yakuza, a settling of scores that was both personal and political. For Shinoda, this was not a setback but a calculated risk, a cost of doing business at the highest level of the Underworld. In 1987, he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. For any other man, this would have been the end. But for Shinoda, prison became a different kind of headquarters, a sealed chamber from which he would continue to command his empire and plot his eventual return. His incarceration in the Fuchu prison, and later in the Tokyo detention house, became the stuff of legend. He maintained ironclad control over his faction, with messages flowing in and out through layers of loyal soldiers and compromised guards. He read widely, studied law to fight his case, and refined his philosophies on power and organization. From his cell, he negotiated treaties, mediated disputes between other Yakuza clans, and even issued orders that shaped the Syndicate's operations on the outside. His life sentence was gradually reduced on appeal, a testament not to a flawed legal system, but to the immense pressure and influence his organization could exert, and to the sheer volume of legal resources at his disposal. He served 13 years, a period that only deepened his mythos within the underworld. He was not a fallen boss, he was a daimyo in exile, a figure of reverence whose authority was magnified by his absence and his unwavering defiance of the state. When Kenichi Shinoda finally walked out of prison in 2000, he emerged into a Japan that had changed dramatically. The bubble economy had burst, leaving a landscape of recession and disillusionment. The Yakuza, too, was under increasing pressure from new anti-organized crime laws that made their traditional protection rackets and public intimidation more difficult. But Shinoda was not a relic. He was a strategist who had spent over a decade in contemplation. He saw the new battlefield clearly. The old, flashy Yakuza of the bubble era, with their garish suits and ostentatious lifestyles, were now liabilities. Shinoda engineered a new doctrine for the 21st century: invisibility. He ordered his members to adopt a low profile, to blend in, to avoid the tattoos and the severed pinkies that made them easy targets for police. He pushed the Yamaguchi-gumi deeper into the shadows of the legitimate economy, aggressively expanding into more sophisticated and globalized crimes. Cyber fraud, intellectual property theft, financial market manipulation, and international drug smuggling became priority sectors. He forged alliances with other transnational criminal organizations across Asia, including triads and Korean gangs, creating a fluid network that could move money, people, and contraband across borders with ease. In 2005, following the death of the then leader, Yoshinori Watanabe, as the sixth Kumicho, Kenichi Shinoda did not preside over a mere criminal gang. He governed a shadow multinational, a dark twin to Japan's corporate conglomerates, with an annual revenue estimated in the billions of dollars. His reign, beginning in the 21st century, marked the zenith of Yakuza power in terms of wealth and influence, yet also its most precarious moment due to unprecedented state pressure. Shinoda's genius lay in his dual-track strategy, a ruthless internal consolidation of power paired with a sophisticated, global diversification of the Syndicate's criminal portfolio. Within Japan, he completed the transformation of the Yamaguchi-gumi into a sleek, modern criminal corporation. He enforced a strict, military-like discipline across the sprawling clan, which at its peak under his command consisted of over 100 subsidiary gangs and tens of thousands of members and associates. Loyalty was absolute, and disloyalty was met with disappearance. He centralized control like a CEO, ensuring that major decisions on territory, conflict, and investment flowed directly from his inner circle. This internal fortress allowed him to project power outward with terrifying efficiency. Shinoda's Yamaguchi-gumi moved far beyond traditional protection rackets and gambling. They embedded themselves in the construction industry, skimming profits from public works projects, including those for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. They manipulated financial markets, engaged in large-scale fraud against government loan programs, and established a stranglehold on the entertainment and nightlife districts. Their most insidious power, however, came from their deep, corrupting penetration into legitimate business. Through front companies and silent partnerships, the Syndicate held stakes in listed firms, real estate investment trusts, and even venture capital funds. This created a chilling paradox. Ordinary citizens might be investing in, renting from, or buying services from a company secretly controlled by Shinoda's organization, funding the very empire that undermined societal safety. Simultaneously, Shinoda masterminded the Syndicate's aggressive international expansion, turning the Yamaguchi-gumi into a key player in transnational organized crime. Understanding that Japan's borders were becoming too hot, he established vital alliances, transforming the Yakuza from a domestic concern into a node in a global criminal network. He solidified partnerships with Hong Kong triads for drug trafficking and money laundering, with Korean gangs for methamphetamine distribution, and with the Italian mafia for arms dealing. The Syndicate became a crucial conduit for Southeast Asian methamphetamine into the Japanese market, a trade of staggering profitability. Furthermore, Shinoda's operatives established bases in Southeast Asia, particularly in Thailand and the Philippines, using them as hubs for human trafficking, cyber-enabled financial crimes, and as sanctuaries for wanted members. This global network served two purposes. It opened vast new revenue streams, and it created a decentralized structure that was more resilient against law enforcement crackdowns in any single country. Shinoda himself became a phantom, a name whispered in intelligence briefings from Tokyo to Washington, D.C. He was rarely photographed, gave no interviews, and conducted his affairs through layers of intermediaries. Yet, his influence was tangible. The Yakuza's involvement in smuggling endangered wildlife, in trafficking counterfeit pharmaceuticals, and in laundering money for other criminal syndicates meant that Shinoda's decisions now affected global security and ecosystems. He had successfully exported the Yakuza brand, trading on its reputation for ruthless efficiency and unbreakable codes of silence. However, this very success planted the seeds of his and the Syndicate's greatest crisis. The Japanese government, long criticized for its lax approach to organized crime, finally acted. In 2011, the government implemented sweeping amendments to the Act on Prevention of Unjust Acts by Organized Crime Group members. These new laws, a direct response to the Yakuza's brazen power, criminalized the payment of any money to gangsters, effectively dismantling their traditional extortion model overnight. It also allowed for the seizure of assets from members and their families. For the first time, the full force of the state was aimed not just at individual gangs. The final act of Kenichi Shinoda's reign has been a masterclass in brutal adaptation under existential pressure, a slow-motion downfall orchestrated not by a rival's bullet, but by the relentless, bureaucratic force of a modern state that finally decided to reclaim its monopoly on power. The enhanced Anti-Yakuza laws of 2011 were a seismic shock to Shinoda's empire, a legislative tsunami designed to financially asphyxiate the Syndicate. For a man who had built his legacy on invisible economic integration, this was a direct attack on his core strategy. Shinoda's response was characteristically shrewd and ruthless. He understood that the Yamaguchi-gumi, in its current colossal form, was now a target too big to survive. In a move that stunned the underworld and law enforcement alike, Shinoda, in 2015, orchestrated what appeared to be a dramatic schism. He expelled a major faction, led by Kunio Inoue, which then formed the rival Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi. This was not a sign of weakness or loss of control. It was a calculated tactical retreat. By splitting the organization, Shinoda aimed to create a smaller, more agile, and less publicly visible core loyal to him, while the splinter group would absorb the brunt of police scrutiny and public hostility. It was a sacrificial pawn maneuver on a grand criminal scale. The split, however, immediately ignited a new, bloody conflict, the Yamaguchi-gumi-Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi War. Streets that had been calm for years once again witnessed drive-by shootings and targeted assassinations, as both factions fought for territory, membership, and symbolic dominance. Shinoda, the master strategist, was now presiding over a civil war of his own making, a controlled burn intended to save the central forest of his empire. Yet, the state's pressure only intensified. Authorities began systematically dismantling the Syndicate's financial networks, freezing bank accounts, seizing luxury real estate, and pursuing tax evasion charges against members and their shell companies with unprecedented vigor. The societal tolerance for the Yakuza evaporated. Businesses publicly posted signs barring gang members, and banks closed their accounts. Shinoda's doctrine of invisibility was now a necessity for survival, but even the shadows were growing thinner. His health, too, began to falter under the weight of age and the constant strain of war and legal siege. Reports of his declining condition circulated, yet his grip on power remained absolute, enforced by a shrinking circle of fiercely loyal lieutenants from the Kodo-kai. The Syndicate's operations contracted and became even more covert, focusing on cybercrime, cryptocurrency laundering, and sophisticated fraud schemes that could be operated from behind computer screens far from the traditional Yakuza turf. The myth of Shinoda, however, persisted, the unbreakable Kumicho who had survived prison, civil war, and now the full might of the Japanese state. But in recent years, a new, profound silence has descended. Reliable intelligence from within the impenetrable walls of the Yamaguchi-gumi's leadership has become scarce. There is widespread belief among analysts and law enforcement that Kenichi Shinoda, now in his 80s, may no longer be the operational commander, that he is a shogun in Twilight, with day-to-day control delegated to a secretive collective of successors. His legacy is a paradox. He is both the Kingpin who oversaw the Yakuza's evolution into a sophisticated global criminal enterprise and the leader under whom its domestic power was fundamentally broken by legal and social forces. The empire he inherited is fractured, under constant assault, and forced into a digital and global underground. The story of Kenichi Shinoda is not one of simple rise and fall, but of terrifying evolution and resilient corruption. From the post-war black markets to the boardrooms of shell companies, from the bloody battlegrounds of the Yama-Ichi War to the silent digital battlefields of cybercrime, he has been a constant, chilling presence. He represents the last of a certain kind of criminal legend, a man whose authority was rooted in a perverse code of honor and ritualistic violence, yet who possessed the cold intellect to navigate the complexities of global finance and international law enforcement. He is a relic of a feudal past who successfully colonized the future. His life forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power, how it can flourish in the shadows of a prosperous society, how it mimics the structures of the legitimate world, and how it can persist long after its era is supposed to have ended. Kenichi Shinoda's name may fade from headlines, but the systems he helped refine, the alliances he forged, and the model of criminal entrepreneurship he perfected will continue to shape the global underworld for decades to come. He is less a man now, and more a blueprint, a warning of how deeply organized crime can embed itself into the very fabric of a nation and the world, adapt